lovers, and welcome. I want to start off by saying I am so blessed to be in a position to suggest tips and tools and even products that can help you lead a tantric life of liberation and expansion. And one of my absolute favorite places to purchase spiritual and sexy items is Wands. Wands.com, spelled Wands. Wands sells, you guessed it, crystal pleasure wands, along with so much more, including yoni eggs, free bleed blankets, other amazing products for yoni steaming. I've been using these products and products similar to them for the better part of a decade, and they have been incredible allies in my journey of sexual healing and expanding my orgasmic potential. And I'm so grateful to be friends with the owner, Courtney. She's amazing. She has so generously provided us all with a discount code for 15% off, and that code is Leola. Leola. You can use it on their website, www.wands.com. Again, the code is Leola, Leola, for 15% off. I'll also make sure that this is linked in the show notes. So thank you for listening, and you're welcome for the inevitable pleasure and healing that is coming your way with these products. Now, let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome to Talk Tantra to Me. It is such an honor to be holding space for this divine knowledge to make its way into your ears and lifestyle. Today, I'm going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to me. It is personal, it's my story, and it's also the impact that I see in this work and the impact that I see available when more and more people get involved in this work, in the tantric world, in the shamanic sexuality world, in the field of pleasure. I'm going to be talking about becoming a pleasure priestess. And I want to start off by sharing a little bit about, throughout the episode, I'll be weaving in some stories of this work, how I got into it, and also the transformations I've seen. And some of the most profound transformations I've seen is, having the most hardened men break down in tears, men that are stoic, men that don't explore their emotions, men that are high achieving CEOs, builders of the world that we're in, break down and open their hearts. I have seen women who, didn't feel safe in their bodies, who, maybe always felt pain with penetration or, didn't have a very high orgasmic potential or just were very critical of themselves. I've seen them, writhe in ecstasy because she finally felt safe to receive. And I've seen, women, priestesses, honor and initiate each other and go forth and make the world a more loving place and bring more and more of this energy into the world. And after a decade of, dancing in the worlds of Tantra and shamanic sexuality, I've worked with thousands of men, women, and couples, between my one-on-one containers, the retreats, other events. I've worked with, countless individuals, and that's not even including, the people that this podcast has touched. I've also built a multi-six-figure business way beyond what I knew was possible. When I got into this work, I was, obviously, I had come from a world where I was living paycheck to paycheck. I wasn't making a lot of impact. I didn't really love what I did. It was interesting to me. There were creative elements, but I didn't really feel lit up by it. And on top of it, again, I was living month to month. I was living in insane scarcity. And I remember, thinking, gosh, if I could just make like 50K a year doing what I love, or, ideally 80K, that would be like, oh my God, I would feel like I've got it. Like I've got it all. This is amazing. And, several years later, not that long. I mean, it only took me, I think, 2 full years going all in. I actually think it was even less than that before I hit six figures. I think that it was like my first full year in doing this, I made six figures, and it was my second or my third year like doing Tantra at all. But, for the first year or so, I was really like kind of splitting my time between my old work, which was I did a bunch of different things. I did freelance modeling, I did freelance writing, creative directing, a bunch of like bits and bobs sort of things. Um, English teaching. Um, and I kind of kept doing some of those things for the first full year that I was in this work. And the second year, I transitioned out of doing that and I transitioned out of doing the other work and focused fully on Tantra in this world. And that year was my first six-figure year. And the next year, my income doubled and I became a multi six-figure business owner. And it has been the same, since then. Um, and like that's insane to me. Like I have a thriving business that's making the world a better place. And on top of it, like I feel better than ever. I feel like I'm prioritizing my pleasure more than ever. And it's such a gift. It's such a blessing. And then I also have created this marriage I am most proud of. This marriage like wouldn't be what it is today if I hadn't really fully adopted the artistry of pleasure priestessry, of being a pleasure priestess, the artistry of being a pleasure priestess. Like my marriage would be completely different. And so I have just seen the profound effect of this work. And it is time to impart more of this wisdom and to sit in a circle and learn from one another. And that's really what, this episode is going to be about. So pause for tea. Ah, so good. Mm, having a sensual experience with this green tea right now. So, what does it mean to be a pleasure priestess or priest? Because I want to, emphasize that I think that this path can be for men as well. And I'm a woman, and I'm going to speak from the female experience and what's possible for those that identify, more in that way. Um, I think that for men in this work, there requires a really, really high level of integrity because of the way that, men are built. And that's not really what this podcast is about. So I'm not going to go too deep into it and just say that this episode is focused on more of women stepping into this path or those that identify as women. That being said, if you are a man that's interested in this work, please reach out to me one on one and we can talk about what that could look like. Or I could suggest some men that have gone through this path and are kind of like a male equivalent of what I do. But yeah, so, what does it mean to be a pleasure priestess? Who is this? And is it for you? To me, to be a pleasure priestess is to be dedicated to mastering the energy that made you, the energy that brought you into the world, which is life force energy. What is pleasure? Let's think about that first. Let's break down the words. Pleasure means feeling good or finding enjoyment in something. And, when we think about pleasure, we often think about sensuality, we think about sexuality, we think about yummy food, we think about things that, yeah, give us a good sensational experience. But pleasure priestess in the context in which I'm sharing is so much more. It's, you know, alchemizing even the darkest parts of our experience, the parts of experience that people feel are the antithesis of pleasure, and being able to alchemize those experiences to actually find something juicy. It's trusting the divine and our soul path. It's going into our shadows and finding a piece of gold there, finding a piece of self awareness, finding ourselves, finding our godliness in our bodies, in our shadows. You know, feeling the hardest human emotions, things like grief. Grief is such a hard emotion. I had my biggest initiation with grief in the past couple of years, both witnessing my husband in the loss of his father and holding space and support for him, and then losing my best friend who was a pet. And there's a whole episode about that on the podcast, my process in grief with losing my pet. And I still feel like, even as I'm sharing this, like I can feel people like judging me, like losing your pet isn't like that big of a deal. And it's like, really? Like, I, beyond words, I didn't know it was possible to feel this level of grief and loss. But something like grief as a pleasure priestess means fully feeling it, fully surrendering to the tidal wave that becomes your lived experience and using that intense feeling to see evidence of how deeply we've loved. How deeply we've loved. That is what grief is. Grief is love that doesn't have anywhere to go suddenly. And the loss of that and the fear of it and allowing things to evolve and to find peace in the taboo topics of death. The holy trinity of pleasure priestessry to me is birth, sex, and death. If you can make love to all of these things, then you're on another wavelength. And there are further episodes in this podcast about death, about grief. I'm not going to go too deeply into those, but just to reemphasize, pleasure priestess isn't just about leaning into the things that inherently feel good, but also finding magic in the really dark places as well. And this path of pleasure priestessy is truly available to anyone and everyone. You can be a pleasure priestess just for yourself, or for your lover, or for the whole world. And sorry, I just want to double check we're recording, and we are. Whew, I was getting a little nervous. Okay, I'm going to take a little pause here, have a little sip. So as I was saying, this path is available to anyone and everyone. And it can also not, it doesn't necessarily need to become your identity. It's really an archetype within us that we can call on, and it's an energy. It's that you can call on, or it can be a lifestyle that you commit to more seriously. Or it could be an expression of your grander purpose in a professional setting. You could actually, take on pleasure priestessry as your calling in such a way that I have. The pleasure priestess is an archetype that exists within all of us, should we choose to call her forth by embodying the principles of Tantra and shamanic sexuality. And, you know, I want to be clear, like, I've studied under lots of different teachers and lineages. I'm one of those people that never really found like the one teacher that I felt I want to go all in and become a disciple of this teacher. And it's actually something that I think has been really impactful for me and something that I feel is kind of the way things are evolving in the future. We spent, hundreds, if not thousands of years typically finding a guru or religious authority that we relied on for our spiritual fulfillment. And we tended to put them on a pedestal. And a lot of what my work revolves around is putting you back on the pedestal. Don't put me on the pedestal. I want to put you on a pedestal for yourself. Get your own pedestal. And I appreciate and acknowledge the lived experience that I have to impart and to share and to offer inspiration. That's why I also like to refer to myself more as a muse than a teacher. My intention is to inspire you to create your own version of spiritual fulfillment. So to be a pleasure priestess is really to embody the principles that create expansion and liberation for you. So, my entry point to shamanic sexuality and tantra was very much focused on myself. That's how I got into it. It wasn't like I found out about this world and immediately thought, "Oh my God, this is it. This is my calling. This is what I'm meant to teach." Um, It was really about my healing. I mean, at first it was really about my curiosity, and then it was about my healing. So when I first kind of stepped into this world, I was inspired by the sexiness, the sex tricks. I mean, from a very young age, I was a highly sexual, like, or sexually interested child. Um, but as I went deeper, it really became about my healing. And the deeper I went inward, the more I desired to expand outward and to share the possibilities with others in the world. I remember there being a point where I noticed myself being really inspired by the other teachers and really having this like like be so cool to teach about this stuff, but feeling like it just wasn't right for me. And there were lots of reasons for that. One was worthiness. There were lots of reasons why I didn't, take on, why it took me a while to actually take on this role as pleasure priestess in a professional setting. And one of those was worthiness. One of those was imposter syndrome. One of those was the belief that there's already tons of people out here teaching about this. The world doesn't need another perspective on this, which I'll address a little bit more as we get through this conversation. But there were a few turning points in which I went from following the Tantra path to actually leading others on the path. And as I mentioned in that season of life, before I transitioned into this work full time, I was a freelance creative artist and storyteller. And one of my clients was a nonprofit based in South Asia, and their mission was to free children from sex trafficking. And that deeply, deeply touched me as someone who, has been a survivor of sexual assault. Yeah, it just really hit me, and I felt so honored to be a voice for this mission in a way, because that was my role with them. I did their copy on their website and other marketing materials. And I was honored when they invited me to actually come to India to help them film a documentary with the intention of raising awareness and garnering funds for the cause. And so I went to Mumbai and I spent a week in Mumbai in India, and I met with survivors and I spoke to the law enforcement and social workers. We toured the red light district as well as the slums. And I even got to ride along on a legitimate raid. Like we like had to have our faces covered. We're driving through like this like kind of jungly area. We stop at this house. They go in and set up cameras, like undercover cameras. And there's like a guy comes in and he's like, showing photos of girls that he has available to basically sell. And um, you know, I wasn't in that room when it happened, but we were, behind in a car, like on site. We were on site. And yeah, those men were arrested and the young girls were freed and were put into the care of social workers. And they had this whole like a what's the word? They had like a community house where these girls were brought to transition and heal and come back into themselves. And my role on this, trip, this work trip in Mumbai was to actually facilitate interviews. So alongside a translator, I had the opportunity to get incredibly intimate with the survivors as well as the other individuals that were a part of the process, the organization and the cause and the founders. And I was so appreciative of the work they're doing, obviously freeing the innocent and arresting the bad guys. And yet I kept noticing throughout the week, like there's something missing. We're not getting to the root cause. Like we're arresting the bad guys, but we're not really addressing the demand. Like we're not like, who are the men or women or whoever that are, you know, that believe that like we weren't looking at why these perpetrators felt that the only way they'd get their desires met was by raping a child. And that really, you know, it stuck with me. Like I was like, this is I'm loving what this organization is doing, but again, like we're missing something. We're arresting the bad guys, yes, and we're freeing the girls, but what about the demand? Where is that coming from? And so at this point in my life, I was actually deeply integrated in living a tantric lifestyle. I was very much on the path. I was, like probably 5 years into really, being tantric in a way, but I wasn't practicing it professionally. Um, I was offering suggestions and readings to friends and people who felt like organically fell into my path. But again, I didn't feel like it was my place to teach Tantra, nor did I feel qualified. But as I interviewed these young women and the individuals who were working tirelessly to free them, I couldn't help but consider how this more holistic, tantric perspective of sexuality could completely disrupt the demand for sexual violence and really bring people back into themselves. And it was in that realization that it dawned on me how disconnected we are as a collective, like holistically, from our sacredness, from our pleasure, from our bodies, and how damaging societal conditioning can be. And also how damaging just abandoning our spiritual practice can be, how damaging it can be to have no self-awareness and surrender to our primal urges without consideration of another human being. Like it blew my mind. And also knowing that like I've done that. Like I've been that person, obviously not on the scale of like raping children, but like there are parts of me, like I'm a part of this one, like I'm a part of this collective, and I am not fully showing up in my ability to contribute to a better world. That's a big realization. Hello, lovers. Please bear with me for a brief interruption with a vulnerable share and offer from my heart. So, when I first began my journey with spiritual intimacy and sacred sexuality, all I could afford were books and free podcasts. I was just out of college in my early 20s and honestly very, very broke. And I'm so grateful for all the complimentary, kind words, and affordable wisdom that have gotten me where I am today. Price shouldn't deter you from healing. It shouldn't deter you from living the life you love or from reclaiming the most powerful energy in your body. It's my belief that time and commitment are also very powerful investments, especially when you're just dipping your toes in the water. You'll know when it's time to make the bigger cash investments in your journey. But let's begin together today with free love from my heart to yours. As you've already discovered, this podcast is free and it includes so much life-changing wisdom, but I'd also love to guide you to some free offers that are on my website, including a downloadable sexual shadow work workbook and a pleasure positive meditation. Both of these resources are amazing places to start in integrating the tantric principles of expansion and liberation into your life. And you can access these at www.talktantratome.com/free or find a direct link in the show notes. Now let's get back to the episode. The truth is the integration of Tantra and the Tantrika path and sacred sexuality and mindfulness and all of these pieces directly address or have the power to eliminate atrocities such as sexual violence and sexual trafficking. And that's like one thing that Tantra does. Like that's one piece. Tantra also has the power to, heal your relationship to your body. It has the power to amplify your relationships and your connections. It has the power to give you the best sex of your life. There are so many things that Tantra can do. And if you've spent any time in my world and on the podcast, you've probably, begun to see some of the possibility here. But this was like a big turning moment for me when I was like, there's so much more I can do here. And ironically, I'd heard from a lot of modern Indians that like they collectively, and again, this is like from secondary sources, this isn't like backed up by science, there's not like a poll on this, but from my conversations with, many modern Indians, they actually fear Tantra and see it as a form of black magic, despite the fact that, this particular lineage of sacred sexuality actually originates in that part of the world. It originates in, East Asia and Tibet and in India. And with this realization, I came to the like conclusion that it was my duty to do this work and that the world needs it, right? And a lot of imposter syndrome came up. Just being one woman. And at the end of the day, though, I decided to trust my internal compass and began sharing more and more of the teachings that helped me. Obviously, like the vision of ending sexual violence is insanely large and it cannot be accomplished by just one person, which is why I'm talking about this today so emphatically. But at the same time, all those years ago, when I made that decision after that trip to India, I never imagined my work would actually touch the populations that were working on that documentary, that were in, India, that were in Mumbai. I never imagined. I was like, I'm going to do what I can. It's going to be in America. It's going to be small. I'm probably not going to be able to touch the India, but maybe there will be ripples. Who knows? But within months of launching Talk Tantra to Me, this podcast, I had listeners from India reaching out to me with praise and excitement. And I've even had, 3 people from India come on the podcast. And those people that came on the podcast that are based in Mumbai, that are based in India, even shared with their local listeners and audiences in India. So in fact, within a year of having, maybe a little bit more than a year, but within about a year of launching the Talk Tantra to Me podcast, I actually had like impact in India where there was this high level of sex trafficking. And I also want to acknowledge that there is lots of sex trafficking that happens in the US as well. We're actually coming off of the Super Bowl, and this is like backed up by, science or like by research. But we're coming off the Super Bowl, right? And the Super Bowl is actually said to be one of the most one of the like times in the year when there's the most like human trafficking that happens in the US during the Super Bowl. I don't know what the reason is behind that. I don't have the study in front of me. I'm like bringing this out of like some back corner of my mind. So sorry if this isn't totally accurate, but that's what I've read in the past, and it's my understanding, which is insane. So I also want to address that this is like happens in the United States every day and is, really like throughout the world. However, the scale in which it's being done in India and this specific nonprofit that I worked for was based there. And I think that it's not a coincidence that, again, this is where, a lot of the tantric lineages originated. So, since embarking on this path, I've worked with, countless people. I've hosted hundreds of tantra ceremonies and rituals for couples and individuals. I've coached one-on-one. I've done group containers. I've led sold out retreats. I've facilitated play parties. I've taught at tantra festivals. And, I get daily messages of gratitude for this podcast. I also get some haters, but it's pretty low and most of it's projection. But I stay, in this because of the transformation I see for the individuals and for the world. Again, I've helped like repair marriages and families. I've, been a safe space for individuals and discovering what they really want, in the bedroom and in life. I've guided other men and women into stepping, into their purpose and helping them create their own businesses and offerings that make an impact in the world and also, abundantly serve them as well. And I truly believe that it's time that more men and women allow themselves to get intimate with the archetype of the pleasure priestess purely in being evidence of what's possible for yourself and for those in your life. Our society really glorifies some, divine feminine archetypes such as the nurturing mother and the fruitful maiden and, the virgin, but conveniently demonizes, some of these more, sensual archetypes like the witch and the prostitute and the priestess and the whore. They intimately understood these archetypes, these types of individuals deeply understood the sacred relationship between the physical world and the spiritual world. and, are in deep reverence of this energy, this life force, this sexual energy. They approached sexuality as a sacred act and worshipped, the goddesses of fertility, such as Anana, who is the name of my new puppy, and Isis and Ishtar, all over the ancient world, including in the cradle of humanity, in Mesopotamia. There's, incredible stories of sexual alchemy in ancient Egypt and within the Egyptian myths, as well as in the Greek myths. In ancient times, there were temples in which initiates would actually meet with priestesses who served as embodiments of the holy goddess, and they worshipped these women, and in some cases even had sex with them. Not always, but that was one, thing that they did in certain communities. So in ancient times, I'm so passionate about this stuff, guys. I'm sorry if I'm speaking a little quickly. In ancient times, it was, these priestesses who initiated kings. I was so fortunate to actually get to go to the Valley of Kings in Egypt on a sacred pilgrimage and be in that energy and be in those sites and be, transported back to that time when these priestesses were initiating these men. In ancient times, when warriors returned from battle, they didn't go, straight home to their families. They often first went to temples to meet with the goddesses who brought them back into their bodies. Um, and this could look, various different ways, but one way, was, these sacred prostitutes softened their hearts and reminded them of their humanity after the coldness, the atrocities of war. These priestesses would bathe them and massage them and tend to their emotional, physical, and spiritual wounds. They would, in some cases, expand their own energetic field to alchemize the wounded energy and to de-armor his heart. This is what I'm talking about when we're talking about pleasure and alchemy. And so then these warriors would return home to their families without the PTSD, our troops are known, are known for or often suffer from. And, a lot of men don't have this same warrior experience that many did in ancient times, but men are battling their own shit, in today's world and are just as much, hardened in different ways. But my husband just this morning sent me a really interesting video that it was like meant to be kind of a joke, but it was also really serious in a way, because it was this guy that was like, this is how dads talk to daughters. And basically he shows the girl, the daughter, being in the energy of like, oh, I'm not feeling well, and her dad's like, take a mental health day, here's some unconditional love, like take care of yourself. And I know that's not everyone's experience with their dad. Mine wasn't so much like that, for example. But then he says, and here's how dads talk to their sons when they're having a rough day. And it's like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like you're being weak, kind of that sort of vibe. And that's what a lot of men are experiencing from their fathers, from their bosses, from other men, in society. And so as pleasure priestesses, we have this, invitation to invite men back into their hearts and to soften them and to let them know that they're worthy of love. So another example, in ancient times, newlyweds would travel to temples to learn the arts of intimacy and divine union. And some say that the word honeymoon originates from the concept of, in ancient times, making a pilgrimage after marriage during the warm months by the light of the full moon to be received by the priests and priestesses. And these holy men and women would teach the young couple the divine arts of sacred union, or eros gamos. And even today, the full moon in June is known as the honeymoon. I don't if you guys aren't super familiar with like moon stuff, every full moon has a different name. There's like the bear moon, and the pink moon, and there's like a bunch of, they all have like a different name. And the one in June, the one that happens in June, is always called the honeymoon. And so, interestingly, as well, year after year, June tends to be one of the most popular months to get married. And today, the honeymoon is widely adopted by couples as kind of this holiday after the wedding, in which it is generally expected to have lots of sex. And my work is built upon, within the context of working with couples, it's built upon giving these couples the tools to tap into the energy of the honeymoon, regardless of the season or the longevity of their relationship. And I'll share a little example from my work. So, interestingly, in June, a couple of years ago, it was actually a new moon. It wasn't a full moon. But in June, a few years ago, I was working with a couple that had been married over 20 years. And it was kind of a one-on-one retreat style container. We spent 3 days together in Joshua Tree. And the first night, we set intentions. And I gave them a few devotional practices to honor themselves and each other and their relationship. And, uh, you know, gave them exercises that encouraged them to meet their bodies as temples to their inner divine and to see each other as such. Had them eye gaze and yoni gaze and give each other affirmations and appreciations. And we closed the ceremony that first night under a starry sky, overlooking the desert. And we're chatting, and the wife said to me, every couple should learn this on their honeymoon. I shouldn't have had to wait 20 years to have connection like this with my husband. I haven't looked into his eyes this long or like that since I was standing at the altar. Since she was standing at the altar 20 years ago, she hadn't looked at her husband like that. Literally gives me chills in this moment. We all deserve to have that kind of marriage, that kind of relationship, right? And we shouldn't have to wait until our life is half over to have it. These tools should be common sense. So it is my belief that our true nature is to have deeply connective, healing, and empowering intimacy. And we are born with this capability. We've merely learned to do otherwise. And so much of the pleasure priestess path involves peeling back layers to come home to our true essence. I've even come to a place of deep gratitude for the sexual violence and collective trauma and societal conditioning that I've experienced. I have found a recognition that these experiences, especially my sexual assault, has allowed me to step into my purpose more authentically. I've healed that trauma, which means I can help others do the same. And I can guide them in letting go of the shame and the guilt and the trauma because I did it. And there's a part of me that has alchemized that loves that I experienced this and loves that I'm a rebel in today's society. I love that every day I get to challenge the status quo, to redefine what it means to be a modern, sexually empowered woman. And I get to remind other people of their power too. And it's fucking cool. I love it. I used to hold so much judgment of the sensual and sexual parts of myself. And as I stepped into this space professionally, I had even more fear. And I worried that men wouldn't commit to me because of how generously I overflowed into the world. I worried that it would affect my ability to have a stable relationship. I was worried that men would judge how easy it is for me to see the best in others and want to love them for all of it. And I was worried that they'd want to keep me all to themselves and own me and not be supportive of me giving my gifts to others, especially to other men, which, sometimes involved, really intimate connections with men. And I was worried that women would ostracize me and blame me for loving their men openly and wanting the best for the men for her, in fact, and feel threatened by the fullness of my expression. I mean, it's really a delicate balance, not taking, the triggered reactions of others personally while also appreciating the evidence of so much reciprocal love from those in alignment. And yeah, it's been a journey of realizing that my perspective of love and sensuality and even sex makes me more attractive and more lovable. And I'm a magnet for receiving love that feels out of this world because the evolved love that I'm a match for sometimes feels like it's beyond this planet's current capacity. But I got to anchor that in. Got to anchor it in. And I want more sisters anchoring it in with me because we are where the magic is. So, being a pleasure priestess, can manifest in an infinite number of ways. And if you feel called to this sacred calling, know that your unique perspective and gifts are not only welcome, but they are needed. And just like, Tantra as a holistic practice, there is no right or wrong way to do it. You get to decide what feels the most juicy and expansive for you to bring to the world, to bring to yourself, to bring to your partners, to bring to your community. You get to decide how deep you want to go, how intimate you want to be, how naked you want to be, who you want to go there with. And it is my belief that there's no population on earth who wouldn't benefit from this work in some way, shape, or form. And there's an invitation to consider how you can be the embodiment of the pleasure priestess and do the work by being you. You are the codes. And it's important to understand that being the embodiment of this type of liberation and sovereignty and self-love is really a rebellious act in some ways. And you have to be prepared to ruffle some feathers and trigger your loved ones and trigger strangers. And it's kind of a part of the gig. But it's beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the gig, and I'm grateful to be here and to be doing it. And it's really a journey of holding your truth, and holding your truth not only becomes an initiation for you, it becomes an initiation for all of those around you. But to be a pleasure priestess is to be a sacred rebel in some ways. And the sacred rebel discerns and questions her reality. She questions the way things are being done and asks, like, is this really the best we can do? It's knowing that just because we've collectively adapted to think and act in a particular way, a better and more expansive way can often be found. A pleasure priestess and a sacred rebel is one who leans into love and lets go of fear-based ideologies and conditionings. We dare to dream of a world of liberation and possibility. And they don't just dare to dream it, it's really like they do it, they live it, they are the embodiment of it. That's what it means to be a pleasure priestess, to courageously stand for the highest love for yourself and for those around you. And we need you. The world needs you. We need your gifts. We need your light. We need as many life force empowered souls as possible to be evidence of full liberation, which is why I am finally opening a container to initiate women into the fullness of their inner pleasure priestess. This is for women who have a soul yearning to meet their edges and embody their most magnificent self. It is for women who are ready to bring all of their priestess powers online alongside other powerful women. It is for women who are dreaming of a more loving world and are already showing up as evidence of its possibility, but are ready to amplify, to make impact. It is for women who are courageous enough to traverse their darkness, to embody the full range of their humanity. It is for women who are comfortable with the embodiment of their divine feminine, but they're also excited to learn how to honor and respect the divine masculine from delicious overflow. You do not have to sacrifice your feminine power and essence to honor men and the divine masculine and the masculine energy within you. In this container, in the Pleasure Priestess initiation, we're going to be learning things like how to worship the body using tantric body work and massage, how to have the best sex of your life and enjoy self-pleasure just as much as partnered intimacy. We're going to be learning about how to fully heal and alchemize your sexual self, including past trauma and or assault. And I want to be clear, this isn't a this shouldn't be done holistically necessarily to heal from these experiences. However, that's been this work has created the most transformation for me in that way. But I definitely recommend working with a therapist, someone that's specifically trained in the realms of trauma, and especially sexual trauma healing. But we're also going to be learning how to master your sexual energy, to become magnetic and grounded in your seduction, to see your seduction as a superpower instead of as like a manipulative tactic. You're going to learn how to honor and elevate your sisters and initiate each other into these mysteries. We're going to learn how to move in the world as a prayer, how to guide yourself and others into the shadows, into the darkness, and come out stronger because of it. We're going to learn about conscious kink and power dynamics for healing and expansive relating. And it is a whole year. You could have a whole year together. It's kind of a mastermind style initiation with both virtual and in-person components. It's a really great value that's touching a lot of different things, and we need a whole year for it. Plus, epic guest teachers, all of whom have either already been on this podcast or will be coming on in the next month or so. So some yummy things to look forward to. We've got Katie. She was on recently talking about becoming unraveled, Shibari. We have Thea who's coming on. We're going to be talking about some power dynamics, some, learning about sexual expression in the Pleasure Priestess program. We have Lauren, who is going to be coming on in the next month or so. She is a trauma therapist, amazing woman. She specifically has worked with a lot of individuals and has personal experience with religious trauma that affects how we relate to our sexuality. Gina is coming on. She is a self-love queen and specifically has some amazing codes around anal work. My friend Tarani is coming on. She's such an incredible priestess. She's going to be coming in to really give us those priestess codes. My lovely bestie, Sophia, who is such an inspiration for my marriage. She went from her husband saying that he wanted to have a divorce to now they're in like this incredible marriage that they're both so committed to and have literally helped me and dozens of others work through their relational dynamics and feel really empowered in them. I'm really excited to have her come on to work with us on being in devotion to the masculine and being in devotion to relationship. My friend Brittini is coming in. She is the founder of Big Pussy Energy. She's going to be teaching us about sensual embodiment, as well as Rena, who is a Shibari artist and tantric body worker. She's going to be giving us some tantric body work codes as well. There will be others too. These are just some of the first ones that are going to be coming on. I'm so freaking excited about this. We're going to be starting in April. There will be other enrollments, but this is like the first time that I've ever done anything like this. So excited to bring other women into this work. There have been a few moments in my journey in doing tantric body work and being a tantric coach where I've been like, more people need this. More people need to know how to do this because I'm just one woman and I can't do it by myself. And more women especially need to know this work and to actually do it in their own unique way that offers a different perspective and offers a different type of evidence for how one can be embodied in their liberation and in their expansion. So if you're interested in this initiation, you can go to talktantratome.com/pleasure or go to talktantratome.com and click the work with me tab. Then you'll see Pleasure Priestess Initiation pop up as one of the options. And I will also have it linked in the show notes. So the sooner you join us, the more cost effective it is as well. We have payment plans. You also can save a bit if you pay in a full for the experience. It's a great value. Again, a whole year and includes in-person and virtual. Super juicy. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening today. Thank you for receiving my heart, my plea for humanity. Have a sexy and spiritual day, and I'll catch you next week on Talk Tantra to Me. Ta-ta. Oops, just kidding. Still here. I have one last thing for y'all. I want to say that the internet is a really, really special place. It's why we're all here right now. And many of us, including me, wouldn't have discovered Tantra or sacred sexuality if it weren't for this nifty invention of the 20th century. And almost none of you would have found my work and my vision without it. I love the internet. and I deeply desire to expand beyond it, to experience more real life love, community, and connection. So I invite you to check out upcoming Tantra events at www.talktantratome.com/events, or click the link in the show notes. I can't wait to give you a big squeeze in real life. Okay, now that's it. Ta-ta for real. Ta-ta.